They promised him a war of gentlemen, a war of grand strategies, of chivalry, an epic of iron and blood. But they forgot to mention one crucial detail: honor does not survive the Eastern Front. Hauptmann Wilhelm von Rheden stood at the edge of a massive ravine in Kyiv, September 1941. He didn't hold a rifle in his hands. He didn't face an advancing enemy army. He wasn't shouting orders to charge. He just watched. He watched as his uniform, the proud legacy of his ancestors, and his own soul turned to ash. Wilhelm was born into a world that no longer existed: blue blood, the Prussian aristocracy. If you looked at his family tree, you wouldn't find merchants or politicians. It was a long, unbroken lineage of generals, cavalry commanders, and knights of the empire. From his earliest childhood in a cold stone manor, he was taught one absolute rule: war is an art. It is a duel between equals. You fight with primal fury, but when the enemy is defeated, you treat them with the utmost respect. That was the code, a code passed down through generations. He despised the new politicians in Berlin, those shouting men in their brown shirts. He despised the SS, with their theatrical cruelty and the silver death's head badges on their caps. To Wilhelm, they were not soldiers. They were thugs, street brawlers, who had somehow been handed military uniforms. But when the fatherland calls, the Prussian answers. The oath had been sworn, and so he marched in step with the rest of the nation. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The mighty German war machine rolled east. But Wilhelm quickly realized this was not France. There was no chivalry here. There was no glory. There was only choking dust in the summer, knee-deep mud in the autumn, and hatred. A hatred so deep, so animalistic and tangible, it felt as though it poisoned the very air they breathed. Wilhelm's men fought hard. They broke through defensive lines. They encircled entire armies. But soon, behind the front lines, in the rear, a shadow began to follow them. The Einsatzgruppen, the mobile death squads. Whispers began to reach the frontline soldiers. Men spoke in hushed, nervous tones around the campfires, glancing over their shoulders. They told strange, blood-chilling stories of trenches hidden deep in the forests. Trenches that were not dug for soldiers, but for civilians. Wilhelm categorically refused to believe it. German soldiers do not murder women and children, he repeated to himself like a mantra, trying to drown out the voice of reason. We are soldiers, not butchers. And then came late September. Kyiv, the city had fallen. But days after the capture, the center of Kyiv was rocked by a series of massive explosions. Radio-controlled mines, left behind by the retreating Red Army, turned the main street into an inferno. Hundreds of German soldiers died. High Command needed a scapegoat. They needed a reason. Wilhelm's battalion was pulled from the front lines. The order passed down was dry and simple. Security duty. Cordon off the designated grid. No one enters. No one leaves. Security duty. It sounded almost innocent. The mundane routine of a rear garrison. But the men giving the briefing did not wear the field gray of the regular army. They wore black, the SD, the secret police. They spoke with a cold, terrifying, mechanical efficiency. The Jewish problem in Kyiv is entering its final resolution. A cold knot tightened in Wilhelm's stomach. But he was an officer. He followed orders. He deployed his men along the perimeter, on the outskirts of the city, near a massive ancient gorge, a place the locals called Babi Yar. Wilhelm thought he was going to see a transit camp, a staging area, a massive deportation effort. Instead, he looked down into the abyss. There were thousands of them, an endless river of humanity, Old men, women, children. Infants clutched in their mother's arms. They were ordered to strip naked, to fold their clothes and stack their documents into neat, orderly piles. They were being stripped not just of their possessions. They were being stripped of their human dignity. And then they were marched to the edge of the ravine. The SS men, they didn't look angry. And that was the most terrifying nightmare of all. They drank schnapps. They smoked cigarettes, chatting about the weather and their families back in Germany. They pulled the triggers of their machine guns, not out of hatred, but with the sheer apathy and boredom of factory workers standing at an assembly line. It was extermination, without regret, without passion, a cold, industrial, bureaucratic slaughter. Wilhelm stood at his post, barely 100 yards from the edge. The autumn wind carried the smell of gunpowder, blood, and the ash of burning passports straight to his face. Only one thought hammered in his mind. Where is your chivalry now, Wilhelm? Where is the honor of the Prussian sword? Where is the noble art of war they taught you? In that moment, a line of the condemned walked past Wilhelm's security cordon. In the crowd, he noticed him. An old man, limping heavily on his left leg, leaning on a makeshift wooden cane. As the old man drew level with the officer, Wilhelm's eyes fell to the man's chest. Pinned to the old man's ragged, dirty vest, dull metal caught the light. It was an Iron Cross, first class, the highest military award for bravery, an award that this man, a German Jew, had earned in the filthy, blood-soaked trenches of the Somme in 1916, fighting for the exact same Germany, bleeding for the exact same empire that Wilhelm now served. The old man stopped. An SS guard shoved him brutally in the back with a rifle butt, but the veteran merely turned his head slowly. He looked straight into Wilhelm's eyes. He didn't beg for his life. He didn't cry. There was no fear in his eyes. He simply looked at the young, tall captain in his perfectly tailored uniform. And in that gaze was something that broke Wilhelm forever. It was a look of absolute, crushing pity. Pity. The old man pitied Wilhelm. He pitied the monster this young officer had become. Wilhelm's heart screamed. He wanted to draw his Luger, to shoot the SS commander standing at the machine gun, to scream at his men to open fire on the executioners, to die in a blaze of gunfire for a righteous cause, to die a hero's death, washing away this incomprehensible shame with his own blood. But he didn't. He stood there, glued to the Ukrainian mud, paralyzed by the sheer unfathomable scale of the evil surrounding him. All his aristocratic pride, centuries of spotless family honor, his supposed moral superiority. It all meant absolutely nothing in the face of this industrial machine of death. They had made him an accomplice, simply by forcing him to watch. Wilhelm von Rheden did not pull the trigger at Babi Yar. His hands technically remained clean, but on that day he learned a terrifying truth. His presence, his inaction, his silence was the loudest crime of all. When his battalion finally left the ruins of Kyiv and marched further east into the bitter snows of Russia, Hauptmann Wilhelm von Rheden was physically alive. He gave orders, he ate his rations, he slept. But the Prussian officer, the man of honor, had stayed behind. He was buried at the bottom of that cursed ravine, along with 33,000 innocent souls, slaughtered in just 2 days. He would fight on until the bitter end of the war. But he was no longer a man. He was a hollow, burnt-out shell in a stained uniform, a phantom wandering through the blizzard, a phantom who knew with absolute certainty one undeniable fact: history would never forgive him, and neither would God. If you want to hear more untold stories from the front lines, subscribe to Echoes of War. We must remember so we never repeat.